On James's birthday, I brought a carefully prepared cake to the hotel. As soon as I entered the private room, someone quickly snatched the cake from my hands, and before I could react, a cream cake was thrust into my face. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground, my body covered in cream. Rachel was holding onto James's arm, laughing with genuine amusement. She apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, sister, it's James's birthday, and we're just playing a prank. The next person who enters will get cake thrown at them." Who would have guessed that it would be me? "Go in a bit," Rachel agreed, nodding. Ben looked at me provocatively and asked, "Ava, do you want to join us? James is heading to that popular cafe." I noticed James slightly furrowing his brow. I shook my head to indicate that I had no intention of joining them. James seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, while Rachel curled her lip in annoyance and sweetly told James, "I'll wait for you outside. Hurry up." James affectionately patted her head and watched as she left. After gathering the documents, he turned to face me, still standing by the door, and asked, "Is there anything else?" I stepped forward and placed my resignation letter on his desk, asking him to sign it. In reality, my position at James's studio had always been awkward. I wasn't a formal employee, but more of an assistant. The difference was that I had never signed an official employment contract. James had once told me that since we were together, marriage was inevitable, and there was no need to split things clearly. Because of this, I had worked with James for many years without a defined role. Now, I felt like this resignation letter was both necessary and unnecessary, as I could leave at any time. Yet, I still hoped to offer a satisfactory explanation for all my years of effort. James barely glanced at the resignation letter, furrowing his brows, and remarked, "Let's talk about it when I get back." As he reached the door, he paused, turned around, and asked, "Do you want me to bring you anything?" I thought back to the times he had mentioned foods he wanted to try. When we had first started dating, I had often imagined us doing little couple activities, like sharing desserts or having a simple, sweet date. However, back then, James was always focused on his work and would irritably refuse, saying, "Do you know how busy I am every day? Don't bother me." I pressed the resignation letter under his drafts, afraid it would blow away in the wind. Hearing his response, I casually dismissed him, saying, "You remembered wrong. I don't like those." The atmosphere turned tense for a moment, followed by the heavy slam of the door as he left. After finishing the handover, I realized it was time to leave. The rain had been pouring all day, and when I reached the studio's entrance, I discovered that the umbrella I had brought earlier was gone. As I searched for it, a colleague tapped me on the shoulder and asked, "Ava, are you looking for your umbrella?" I nodded, and she seemed hesitant. I could vaguely sense that Rachel had taken it. She confirmed, nodding sympathetically. "Ava, how about we go together?" she suggested. I shook my head. "Your way home is different from mine. It wouldn't be convenient." "I'll take a taxi," I replied. My colleague nodded and opened the umbrella before heading into the pouring rain. Soon, I was left alone in the studio. As I opened my phone to call a cab, James's call suddenly came through. "Rachel took your umbrella this morning. Why did you only take two?" "Never mind, I'll come pick you up. Just wait for me." After the call ended, my phone quickly ran out of battery and shut off. Was it just bad luck? I sat in the studio's lobby, waiting for James to arrive. It was nearly 11 Haas when the patrolling security guard saw me and reminded me that the building was closing soon. I stood up and walked out, noticing that it was still pouring outside. I took off my coat and used it to shield my head. By the time I got home, it was already past midnight. I plugged in my phone to charge and poured myself a cup of hot water, trying to warm up. After the miscarriage, I hadn't rested well, and now, with the air conditioning blowing, my lower abdomen started to ache again. I curled up in bed, the pain making it impossible to sleep. After a while, I vaguely heard the sound of the door opening. I opened my eyes to see a hint of panic on James's face. "Ava, what's wrong?" I struggled to steady my voice, asking, "Please take me to the hospital." James nodded immediately, but then Rachel's voice came from behind him. Sister, is your stomach hurting? Is it your period? If it's just menstrual cramps, you don't need to go to the hospital. The rain was pouring heavily outside, and I felt uneasy about James driving. Ava, are you blaming James for not picking you up on time tonight and trying to make him feel bad? Rachel leaned against the bedroom door, smiling at me. Upon hearing her words, James's expression immediately turned cold. Stop being melodramatic, he said. We have painkillers at home. You can just take them. James looked at my messy state with a frown, disdain clearly visible on his face. He said, It's just cake. You shouldn't hold it against Rachel. He added that he wouldn't be going home that night because Rachel had a surprise for him. Regarding my wedding dress design, it would have to wait, as Rachel didn't have any new clothes, and I needed to prioritize designing new outfits for her. Since our engagement, James had delayed my wedding dress design for the 199th time, all because of Rachel. I was in so much pain that I could barely speak, but Rachel continued, Sorry, Ava. James didn't mean to not come pick you up. I just got a bit of a cold, so James had to drop me off first. He actually wanted to pick you up, but didn't expect you to come back so early. James pulled Rachel aside, trying to explain, but she just made things worse. I'll take you home, Rachel said, leaning against James as if unafraid. The rain is too heavy today. I'm worried about you. If you drive, James, can I stay at your place tonight? She winked, almost clinging to him. James hesitated for 2 seconds, but ultimately agreed. I struggled to sit up, and James glanced at me irritably. Fine, I'll go get you some medicine. You just rest. I endured the abdominal pain and forced myself to get out of bed, putting on my coat. However, James grabbed me and asked, What do you want? Tonight was my fault for making you wait at the studio for such a long time, but you returned too quickly. All right then, I'll take care of you tonight. Stop causing trouble. In James's surprised gaze, I slowly pulled my hand away. James, I can manage this myself. I know my body well, and you should spend some time with Rachel. I pushed open the door, suddenly realizing I had forgotten my phone. Just as I was about to turn back, the phone flew towards me and struck my forehead. Blood immediately started pouring out, and James's expression shifted from anger to panic. Ava, I didn't mean to. Are you okay? He grabbed me again, wanting to check the wound on my forehead. I calmly wiped the blood away and tucked my now cracked phone out of sight, slipping away from his grasp once more. As I stepped outside, James returned to his previous anger. Ava, you really have a temper. If you're capable, just go and never come back. At that moment, Rachel's soothing voice came from behind the door. I calmly responded, Okay, I won't come back. In truth, I didn't want to go back at all. James didn't hear me, only hearing Rachel's comforting words. I took a taxi to the hospital, where I went through the admission process. After receiving the IV drip, I felt much better. The doctor checked my condition and confirmed there were no complications. Miss Bennett, you've just gone through postpartum recovery. Don't push yourself too hard. Take care of your health to avoid further issues, the doctor advised. I nodded in agreement. After staying one night at the hospital, I was discharged and headed back home. It was morning when I arrived, and James had just left for work. Quietly, I packed all my belongings into a suitcase. I had already packed most of it over the past few days, so it didn't take long. I had booked a flight to Ha, the place every designer dreams of, and I was no exception. However, in the past, when I mentioned this to James, he would always mock me. Ava, you can't even design a decent collection right now, and you want to go out and make a name for yourself? James was wrong. I had willingly been his assistant before, sacrificing my chance to focus on design-related projects, but that didn't mean my design skills were lacking. Dragging my suitcase to the airport, I sent James one final message before boarding. Let's break up. Once the plane landed, I took a taxi to the house I had rented in advance. The place was small but cozy. After taking my medicine, I was about to start organizing my things when several messages popped up on my phone. They were from colleagues at the studio. Ava, when did you submit your resignation? We had no idea. James found the letter while packing today, and he got so angry that he tore it up. Ava, where are you right now? Before coming here, I had blocked all of James's contacts, so he couldn't reach me. I didn't hesitate to reply. I'm at a hospital in Ha, currently hospitalized in gynecology. The response was quick, and they fell silent. I could imagine they were going to tell James. I continued packing my things, and soon my colleague's phone rang, but I didn't answer. Messages kept coming in, one after the other. Ava, where are you? Ava, come back quickly. My patience is running out. Ava, the doctor said you had a miscarriage. What's going on? Ava, please reply. Can I pick you up? I didn't even look at them. I just blocked them on WeChat and deleted all my colleagues from the studio. I didn't care about James's thoughts, whether he felt regret or shock. I wanted him to understand that he once had a child, one that he had harmed to death. After finishing my packing, I walked out the door with my prepared resume. Before arriving here, I had already submitted my resume to several job platforms. Although I never officially signed a contract with James's studio, I honestly listed my work experience over the years, highlighting my excellent education and diverse work background. I slowly got up, covered in cream, and walked out of the hotel. The damp warmth spread from beneath me, and I could feel blood beginning to flow. I was rushed to the hospital, but the child I shared with James was gone. James was right. I didn't want to hold a grudge against Rachel, especially not for a man. After 3 days in the hospital, I finally returned home. Once I rested, I sat on the sofa, absent-mindedly touching my abdomen. It felt empty, as though the child had never existed. My gaze shifted to the vase on the coffee table, which I had changed on James's birthday, but now ignored. The flowers had wilted, and the room looked unchanged since my departure. It was clear that James hadn't been home for days. I cooked for myself, and as I sat down, James returned. He paused in the doorway, looking surprised when he saw me, then frowned as though to say, "So now you decide to come back?" It was obvious he knew I hadn't been home for days, but hadn't bothered to call or text. I didn't respond, quietly continuing to eat from my bowl. It didn't take long for me to receive an interview invitation from my ideal company. I took a taxi to the interview location, and the interview went smoothly. Before long, I was able to complete the onboarding procedures. On my first day, I was assigned to the design team for a new collection. The company was known for its high efficiency, so HR quickly placed me in the group. My colleagues didn't react much to my presence. Even though I had started working, I was still a newcomer and often couldn't join in on group discussions. One day, however, we needed to submit our group's work from the past few days. I accidentally found a small mistake. The company placed great importance on this new series, and the designs were directly linked to Mr. Mitchell, who was known for being very particular and meticulous. Fortunately, before submission, I was able to stop the team leader and handed him the corrected design draft. Unexpectedly, this draft didn't receive criticism from Sebastian Mitchell. Instead, it was well received. This was enough to maintain my status in the group, and I was finally able to participate in discussions and designs with them. In the next round of design draft submissions, the team leader handed me the draft and signaled for me to submit it to Sebastian. "Ava, you've been with us for a while, and we've all seen your capabilities. I believe you can handle this task," he said. When I knocked on Sebastian's office door, I felt a bit nervous. It wasn't until I heard his calm voice say, "Come in," that I stepped inside. I lowered my head and placed the design draft on his desk, trying not to disturb him. "Mr. Mitchell, this is our team's new round of design drafts for your review," I said softly. Sebastian simply responded with an M and didn't speak further. The room was silent for a long time, and I couldn't stand the quiet anymore. I broke the silence. "Mr. Mitchell, please carry on with your work. I've left the design draft here. If there are any issues, please feel free to call me." I turned to leave, not wanting to bother him any longer. Just as I was about to walk out, Sebastian's low voice came through. "Wait!" I slowly turned back. a trace of unease rising in my chest. Was I about to be criticized on our first meeting? I looked down, not daring to say a word. After a moment of silence, he chuckled softly. "You're the new Ava Bennett." I was taken aback. I couldn't believe Sebastian actually knew my name. I nodded, and he continued. "I've heard from H about you. You have a lot of work experience, but it seems your previous place didn't treat you very well. They didn't even give you a formal employee contract." I forced a smile, too tired to explain further, and simply agreed silently. Sebastian nodded, as if acknowledging my abilities. "They didn't make a mistake. You really are talented. I'm optimistic about your new series design drafts." I looked up and studied him for the first time. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips as he looked at me. I must admit, he was quite handsome, but I also felt like I had seen him before. Though I couldn't place where, I simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell." After another moment of silence, he spoke again. "You can go back now." "All right, Mr. Mitchell. You carry on with your work," I said, and as I finished speaking, I turned to leave the office. Back at my desk, my colleagues immediately surrounded me, asking, "How was it? Did you meet Mr. Mitchell? Does he have a strong presence? Did you get criticized?" They mentioned how he would always pick apart a few things whenever he reviewed new work. I shook my head, replying, "No." Mr. Mitchell even encouraged me a few times. As soon as I said this, the chatter around me stopped abruptly. They stared at me in shock, and after a long pause, one of them finally blurted out, "Ava, do you have some kind of relationship with Mr. Mitchell?" Noticing my silence, James sat down next to me and asked, "What's wrong? You're not still upset about that, are you? It was just a cake." I continued eating, humming softly in response. The anger from earlier had faded. James clicked his tongue in annoyance and was about to speak when a notification on his phone interrupted him. He opened it, and his irritation quickly turned into a smile. He stood up and walked into the bedroom, his voice calm as he said, "Okay, I'm just going home to grab something, not to see her. You stay here, I'll be back soon." It was obvious that her referred to me, and the home he mentioned had never felt like a place for both of us. Moments later, James rushed out of the bedroom, walking past me and leaving only a remark, "You should calm down." I couldn't help but laugh. Come on, I didn't live in Ha before, but honestly, I've always felt like I've seen Mr. Mitchell somewhere before. I tried to recall his features, but couldn't pinpoint where I'd seen him. At that moment, someone asked, "Ava, I remember you graduated from Jinden Design, right?" I nodded, and the person continued, "That's it. Mr. Mitchell is also from Jindan, so maybe you've really met before." I was taken aback, but I had no memory of anyone named Sebastian Mitchell. As I pondered this, my phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was a call from James. He sounded a bit tired when he asked, "Ava, are you in Hay?" I quickly calmed myself and responded, "James, I've told you before that we've broken up." But James, sounding visibly upset, retorted, "No, I never agreed to the breakup. Why didn't you tell me you had a child? If I had known, things wouldn't have ended up like this." I sneered, sensing that James still seemed to blame me. Did he really feel guilty about the child that died because of his actions? "James, if you have nothing else, you can hang up," I said. James immediately replied, "Ava, didn't you always want to see the wedding dress I designed for you? I'm currently busy working on it, and I'll show you the finished product soon." He couldn't come back from Ha quickly enough. This was the first time James had mentioned the wedding dress, which he had nearly forgotten about. "James, I don't want it anymore. I don't want that wedding dress, and I don't want you anymore." After saying this, I ended the call and blocked his number. The friend request notifications continued to pop up in my WeChat, but I ignored them and kept focusing on my work. As the workday drew to a close, my colleagues began leaving the office. A sudden surge of creative inspiration kept me working late into the evening. I was so absorbed in the drafts in front of me that I didn't even notice when the lights in Sebastian's office turned off. The autumn-winter night was still a bit chilly, and as I shrugged on my coat, my mind cleared. Turning around, I saw Sebastian with an arched eyebrow, watching me and asking if I was still working late. I nodded and handed him the nearly finished design draft, indicating that I wanted to finish it and not put it off until tomorrow. Sebastian's gaze fixed on the design draft in his hand, and his eyes flickered slightly. He commented, "Your design style hasn't changed at all. It's still the same as before." His words made me feel a sense of familiarity with him. Unable to resist, I asked, "Mr. Mitchell, have we met before?" Sebastian looked taken aback for a moment, but then smiled, saying, "It seems you have a poor memory, too." I couldn't help but recall how much I used to enjoy following him. How could he forget? Upon hearing his words, I finally understood where the familiarity came from. During college, I often accompanied my professors to various design competitions and slowly developed my own design style. Soon after, my graduate fashion series was released, and Sebastian had sought me out. He would wait for me downstairs in the dorm every day, asking if I would collaborate with him on a competition. Even my roommates joked that this unfamiliar junior was more serious than those who were chasing after me. But the Sebastian back then was very different from who he was now. I hadn't even connected the dots between the president of such a renowned design company and that naive boy from back then. Realizing that I had been in a daze, Sebastian smiled, as if remembering something. I forced a laugh, feeling a bit awkward. Mr. Mitchell had an impressive memory to still recall those events after so many years. He slightly squinted his eyes, but didn't say anything further. Then, he glanced outside and reminded me that it was getting late. He told me he was going to take me home, and added firmly that I couldn't refuse. The subway had already stopped running, and we were far from the city center, so catching a taxi wouldn't be convenient. Just like that, Sebastian pulled me into his car. Over the next few days, he found different reasons to give me a ride home. When I finally handed him the design draft, the delight in his eyes was almost impossible to hide. "Take a day off? Consider it a reward," he said. "Rest well. Soon you can take your new designs to Fashion Week." I nodded, only then realizing something about Fashion Week. Sebastian's company and James's studio could be seen as rivals, both aiming to present the best designs at the upcoming event. Who would win the designer award was something everyone would be watching. I didn't refuse. After all, I needed a break. Having just moved to Ha, I still had many things to sort out. I packed my things, and as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a crowd gathered by the company entrance. I turned to leave through another door, but then a familiar voice called out, "Ava!" James rushed up and hugged me tightly. "Ava, come back with me," he pleaded. I pushed him away, feeling a wave of discomfort. "James," I frowned, planning to ask how he found me, but before I could, he pulled out a design draft and handed it to me. "Look, I've designed the wedding dress. We can get married now, Ava. Come back with me. Haven't you always wanted to marry me? I'll prepare a grand wedding for you. If the dress doesn't meet your expectations, I can modify it. Please don't break up with me." The next morning, a flood of WeChat messages popped up. A friend urged me to check the trending topics. The top topic was James. He was going to design a new season of clothes for my little girl as an apology. That night, James released a series of autumn and winter outfits, all designed specifically for Rachel. What made it more special was that he used the studio's official account instead of his personal one, as the studio account had more followers and higher visibility. When a famous designer creates exclusive outfits for his lover, it instantly goes viral, trending #1 all night. James lowered his head like a lost puppy. I scoffed, responding coldly, "James, what disappoints me the most is you. Have you forgotten the child we lost because of you? That day was your birthday, and I wanted to surprise you, but the cake I worked so hard on ended up being smashed in your face. And as the father of that child, you told me not to hold it against you. James, how could I possibly forgive you?" After I finished speaking, I hurried to leave, but James chased after me once again. "Eva, enough! Why are you still fixating on these things? I know I was wrong, and I am trying to make up for it. I'm fixing our relationship. What about you?" I stopped in my tracks, incredulous, as I listened to James speak such shameless words. Clenching my teeth, I raised my hand and slapped James, yelling, "Get lost! I don't want to see you anymore. You don't need to make any reparations for me. We are done." James stood there stunned, holding his face for a moment, his expression darkening. "No matter what you say today, you have to come back with me," he insisted, trying to grab my hand. Just as we were arguing, a strong embrace pulled me in. The familiar scent told me, without looking, who it was. It was Sebastian. James's face darkened even further as he glared at Sebastian and me. "What? You said you wouldn't come back with me, so you found a new love here? I didn't expect you to say you loved me before. Is your love really that cheap?" Before James could finish, Sebastian punched him hard. Sebastian glared at James, saying coldly, "Throwing a tantrum in front of Ava doesn't look good, James." James wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and glared at Sebastian with fury. "This isn't right. I just want to take my family back," James said, his words clearly showing he wasn't hearing what was happening. I could clearly hear that Ava said she no longer had anything to do with him, so why was he still holding on? James glanced at his assistant, and it was obvious he was desperate for attention. The assistant quickly raised his phone to start recording. James still had to consider his public image, so he hastily looked at the camera and made a swift exit, saying, "Wait and see." Sebastian released my hand, only to grasp it tightly once again, saying he would drive me home. After a brief rest, James didn't stop his harassment. In addition to the continuous calls and messages, he even showed up at my rented place. The knocking went on for 3 minutes without stopping, which infuriated me. I pulled out my phone and called the police. Soon, officers arrived and began investigating James's background. James stared at me, his expression full of disbelief. "What are you doing?" he asked. I shrugged and turned to the officer, saying, "Officer, I don't know him. Who knows why he refuses to leave my doorstep?" James tried to say more, but because of his out-of-town status, he was taken by the police for questioning. As a result, I had a peaceful day. However, not long after, a video surfaced online of James being taken away. James's studio was quite well known, and this event quickly became a trending topic. The next day, as I was heading to work, James appeared before me again. "Ava, haven't you had enough of this? Haven't you seen what they're saying online?" he asked. I simply smiled and responded casually, "James, you're the one who kept bothering me. It's not like I forced you to." Seeing my indifferent attitude, James softened his tone. "Ava, you weren't like this before. You used to care about everything at the studio, and about me." His words made me cool down, and I asked, "What about you, James? Have you ever cared about me? In this situation, what right do you have to ask for my forgiveness? What right do you have to demand that I marry you?" I said coldly. James paused for a moment, and then took out a small box from his pocket. He opened it carefully to reveal a sparkling diamond ring. "Ava, I took a long time to find this, hoping you would like it. Put it on." I looked at the ring, which was beautifully crafted, yet elegant. I had to admit that, as a designer, James had a good sense of aesthetics, but it wasn't my style. "James, I don't like this ring," I said bluntly, "and I don't like you anymore. We're done." I stared at James coldly as his face turned pale. "If you want to continue with your career, then don't bother me anymore. Otherwise, I'll expose everything about you and Rachel online for the public to judge," I warned. After saying that, I walked to the taxi stand, opened the door, and got in. Through the window, I saw the color drain from James's face, and I couldn't help but feel amused. James's work once led me to dream of him designing exclusive outfits for me too, but when I brought it up, he coldly replied that my temperament didn't match his style. That comment completely shattered my fantasies. A few people from the studio approached me. Ava said, "We're preparing for the next fashion week, and with such a tight schedule, how could James be so casual?" I replied, "I'm on vacation and can't handle work. Please direct everything to James." My response was direct, and instantly my WeChat went silent. But not long after, my phone rang again. It was a few voice messages from James. James returned to his studio to prepare for the upcoming fashion week, but he seemed overly confident. After several days of delays and the considerable funds spent on designing outfits for Rachel, how could his studio compete with Sebastian's company? Sure enough, James's fashion piece, rushed and poorly made, was eliminated early. The studio was already in financial trouble due to James's preparations for Rachel's surprise, and they had hoped this fashion week would bring in major orders, only to face potential bankruptcy and dissolution. In contrast, Sebastian's company, with our team's meticulously prepared collection, won the championship and quickly earned recognition in the design community. Orders began pouring in. Sebastian didn't forget to express his feelings for me. After a failed relationship, I had already seen through Sebastian's intentions. When he attempted to confess his feelings for me for the third time, I interrupted him directly, saying, "Sebastian, give me some time. I want to wait until work is completely stable before considering this." Sebastian didn't say much more, but showed me more support at work. 6 months later, I was promoted to design director at the company, which had become a leader in the design industry. I agreed to Sebastian's pursuit, and he was so excited that he announced our relationship on Weibo in front of many people. He hugged me, saying, "Ava, I've pursued you for so many years, and finally, there's a result." I laughed and gently punched him, feeling that life was becoming more beautiful. The next time I heard news about James was when I was planning to get engaged to Sebastian. At that time, I was designing a dress for our engagement party. Sebastian walked into the bedroom, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered, "James came to see you today." I paused for a moment, but continued with my design. "Don't you want to ask what he wanted?" Sebastian asked. I put down my pen, gently pinched his face, and asked, "What did he want to do?" "And you don't focus on these trivial matters. Think about where our engagement party will be." Upon hearing this, the joy in Sebastian's eyes almost overflowed. He held me tightly and happily said, "I've already thought about it. We'll do it this way." I sighed patiently as I listened, and finally I smiled slightly, thinking that Sebastian had really good taste. Sebastian buried his head in my shoulder, and in a low voice asked, "Ava, will you marry me?" I was momentarily taken aback, then couldn't suppress my laughter. "Yes, I will," I replied. I didn't need to ask James why he came to see me, because I knew he had completely lost me. Our engagement party proceeded as planned, and everything moved toward perfection. James must have known by now. On that night when he smashed the cream cake in my face on his birthday, I lost our child. That night was forgotten because of Rachel, and I returned home alone, in the pouring rain, carrying an unborn child. I thought to myself that the child in heaven might not forgive him. Sebastian knew all of this. He always held me gently and softly said, "Ava, I will love you from now on. I will give you happiness." And I wanted to tell him, "Sebastian, thank you for helping me regain my faith in love. From now on, you're not only my treasure, but also my destiny because my future has you in it." "Ava, why did you suddenly take leave? Do you know how busy I am right now? I still have to help you with work." I calmly replied, "James, I had a miscarriage." There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a menacing voice message. "Ava, you need to understand that not everyone can tolerate your unreasonable behavior. And now you want to use a miscarriage as an excuse? Do you realize you've been absent for 3 days? I'm giving you one last chance. You must come to work tomorrow, or just leave." I didn't say much, simply replying, "Okay." I knew well that James wouldn't believe me. He had always been strict about work, especially when it came to leaves. He didn't tolerate delays, except when it came to Rachel. If she casually mentioned a stomachache, James would drop everything to accompany her, even when it was confirmed she had no health issues. In the group chat, Rachel added, "Sister Ava, James is really busy with work lately. How can you push all the work onto him without helping?" I didn't want to argue with her and quietly exited the group chat. I got out of bed, opened my computer, and started writing my resignation letter. James didn't intend to fire me. I would leave on my own. The next day, as I was preparing to go to the studio, my phone rang. I immediately recognized it was a call from James. The ringtone was exclusively his, but I hadn't heard it in so long that I had forgotten to change it. I answered, and before I could say anything, he spoke first. "It's raining. Remember to bring an umbrella when you come over." I looked out the window and saw that it had started pouring. He paused briefly, sounding somewhat apologetic, then added, "Make sure to wear warmer clothes. It's cold outside." After that, the call ended. I picked up the resignation letter from the table, grabbed 2 umbrellas from the door, and left. When I arrived at the studio, I noticed a look of sympathy in everyone's eyes. The issues James had faced were clearly aimed at targeting me, but I had been through similar situations many times before, and their initial shock had turned into sympathy. I held the umbrella and opened the door to James's office. At that moment, James was focused on sketching a series of costume designs while Rachel sat beside him, sipping tea and watching him work. Upon my arrival, Rachel smiled and greeted me. "Hi, Ava." James glanced at me and said, "Put the umbrella down." Rachel pouted and shook James's arm, asking when he would accompany her for afternoon tea. "I've been waiting for so long." James set down his pen and smiled helplessly. "Okay, let's go."